There are absolutely no pure evil species. They exist in every terrestrial and extraterrestrial species alike, both good and evil individuals. It's even true of your own people, but there is no such thing as an absolutely evil species. This conception is really very primitive. You people have believed from time immemorial what you are supposed to believe, what was foreseen for you to believe by your creators. Every well-known species, even the more highly developed ones, consist of a great number of individual consciousnesses. At least a portion of the consciousness is individual, even though there are connecting fields of consciousness. These self-sufficient spirits are able to decide freely for themselves a lifestyle which is either good or evil, according to your own human standards. It depends again on the respective point of view. Your people are not necessarily in a position to judge whether the deeds of a much more highly developed species are good or evil, because you stand at a lower observation point from which I once again reaffirm that the following text is the absolute truth and is not fiction. It was composed from 3 original tape recordings, which were made on April the 24th, 2000, with a tape recorder during my second interview with the reptilian creature known as Lacerta. At Lacerta's request, the original text of 31 pages was revised and shortened up to deal with some questions and answers. Some existing questions were partially shortened or amended. It was even undertaken to extract messages and significance from it. This part of the interview, either not mentioned or not mentioned completely in the transcript, deals primarily with personal issues, paranormal demonstrations, the social system of the reptilian species, and alien technology and physics. The reason for the shifting of the date and time of the second meeting was a possible observation and surveillance of my own person after the publication of the first transcript. Although everything was attempted on the advice of Lacerta to keep my identity a secret, just 2 days after the dissemination of the document abroad and various unusual events took place. Please don't think that I'm paranoid. However, I believe that the publication of the interview has drawn either official attention or the attention of some organization to me. Up until this time, I usually regarded people who believed that they were being followed by the state to be nothing more than jokers. But now I have begun to revise my ideas on that since events in January. It began with the failure of my telephone for several hours. When the phone became operational again, there were quite quiet echoes and strange clicking and whirring sounds when I made calls. A defect could ostensibly not be found anywhere. Overnight, important data disappeared from the hard drive of my computer. The testing program reported defective sectors where, strangely enough, there were only data which dealt with illustrations and complete textual material from the interview. These defective sectors also contained material of a paranormal nature in the field of my research. Fortunately, the material was also stored on floppies. In addition, I discovered by pure chance some hidden data in a likewise hidden directory index. The name which appeared on the data and the directory index was E72UJ. A friend who is a computer expert could not make anything of this designation, and when I was about to show it to him, the directory index had disappeared. One evening, my apartment door was standing wide open, my TV set was running, and I'm absolutely confident that I had turned the TV set off. A minivan with British markings and the imprint of a Europe-wide supermarket chain parked in front of my house. I noticed the same minivan again on several occasions, travelling at a distance behind my car, even when I visited the town of blah 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 blah, 65 kilometres away. When I returned, the car was on the other side of the street once again. I never saw anyone get into or out of the car. A knock on the door of the vehicle and on the tinted windows caused no reaction of any kind. After about 2 weeks, the minivan disappeared again. When I informed EF personally about these events, he suggested that I change the place and date of the meeting in order to assure our own and Lacerta's safety. The meeting took place on April the 27th, 2000, in another isolated location. It was unobserved as far as I can determine. Once again, all of this may sound strange and paranoid, like a fantasy from a cheap science fiction film. However, I can only repeat to and assure the reader once again, all of this is the unadulterated truth. Believe my words or don't believe them. These things have happened, and they will continue to happen whether you believe it or not, until it is too late. Our civilization is in danger. Ulrich K., May the 3rd, 2000.
Now we move to the transcript of the interview.
The meeting began with an appraisal of diverse questions and opinions which I had gotten from readers of the first transcript in anonymous fashion through distribution from my trustworthy friends. Some of these opinions, altogether there were over 14 pages of paper, contain comments shaped by everything from a radically religious to a fanatical tendency to welcome contact with the reptilian species. Some of these comments contain stereotypical phrases like servants of hell or species of the evil one. I don't want to go into any kind of detailed description here, since I don't want to pass on further any false and radical realm of thought.
When you read these religious and animosity-ridden comments here, what do you think and feel then? Is the relationship between your species and ours really shaped from that kind of total negation?
Does it amaze you that I am not completely angered by that? I had fully expected those kind of extreme reactions. The programming from the utter negation of another species, especially the reptilian species, as in your own case, is deeply embedded in each of your own individual consciousnesses. This ancient conditioning stems from the days of your third artificial creation and, biologically speaking, is passed down as an information genome from generation to generation. The identification of my species with the powers of darkness was the primary intention of the Elohim, who like seeing themselves in the role of the powers of light, something which is in itself, it represents a paradox, since that humanoid species was extremely sensitive to your sunlight. In case you were expecting me to act offended, I guess I'll have to partially disappoint you. These obscure intentions are not really your fault. You are simply following, for the most part, what you have inherited from your ancestors. It is indeed actually somewhat disappointing that many of you develop no especially strong individual self-conscience. for this would help you to overcome the conditioning. As I already said, we were in direct contact with the last several centuries with some of your more primitive human tribes. These tribes had themselves succeeded in breaking through the old creation programming. They were able to meet us without tension, hate, and total rejection. Apparently, many of your modern civilized individuals are not in a position to think on their own, but rather let themselves be guided by programming and religion, which is also a manifestation of that ancient programming and part and parcel of the plan of the Elohim. Therefore, comments of that kind I'd sooner regard as amusing than irritating. They simply confirm in large measure for me my suppositions about your defined mode of thinking.
Therefore, you're not the species of evil one, as was remarked earlier.
How am I supposed to answer that? Your people still think according to a simple and completely inappropriate scheme of generalizations. Simply put, there are absolutely no pure evil species. They exist in every terrestrial and extraterrestrial species alike, both good and evil individuals. It's even true of your own people, but there is no such thing as an absolutely evil species. This conception is really very primitive. You people have believed from time immemorial what you are supposed to believe, what was foreseen for you to believe by your creators. Every well-known species, even the more highly developed ones, consist of a great number of individual consciousnesses. At least a portion of the consciousness is individual, even though there are connecting fields of consciousness. These self-sufficient spirits are able to decide freely for themselves a lifestyle which is either good or evil, according to your own human standards. It depends again on their respective point of view. Your people are not necessarily in a position to judge whether the deeds of a much more highly developed species are good or evil, because you stand at a lower observation point from which an assessment is not possible. Your simple words, good and evil, are in any case examples of a tendency towards generalization in my language. In my language, there are many concepts for the various shades of meaning of individual behaviors in comparison to the norms of a society. Even those extraterrestrial species which are inclined to act with antagonism towards you are not species of the evil one, even though they operate negatively with respect to your own race. They do this for their own reasons and do not regard themselves as evil. Were your structured way of thinking more linear or more focused as theirs is, then you would also behave in such a fashion. The attitude of a species towards other kinds of existence naturally depends very heavily on its respective structured way of thinking. Each species sets its own priorities. To classify that as good or evil is really quite primitive, for the survival of any species argues for many varieties, among them your own, as well as even the most varied of the worst or negatively directed deeds. I won't even exclude my own kind in this regard, for there have been certain occurrences in the past which I don't personally welcome, but about which I would also not like to go into detail. None of these occurrences have happened in the last 200 years. Please note that the following, that there are no absolutely good and there are no absolutely bad species, because each and every species always consists of individuals.
In the letters that I got, There was often the question whether you could go into any greater details regarding the advanced physics that you commented on last time. Many people said your words made no sense. For example, how do UFOs function? How do they fly? How do they perform the maneuvers that they do?
I ought to explain that to people? That's not all that simple. Let me think about it for a minute. I always have to use very simple words in order to make clear to you the basic principles of a higher kind of science. Let's try this. You have to be clear about some fundamental facts. The first thing is that you must divide up the conception of the physical world because each existence consists of different layers. Let's say, for simplicity's sake, that it consists of a material illusion and a sphere of influence. Translator's note. No legitimate translation exists for this word Veldraum. Veld means field, Raum means space, room, expanse. Therefore, I'm translating it as sphere of influence.
Is that a right translation? Fjälldraum.
Raum's not a Swedish word.
Mm.
Certain physical conditions are associated only with the realm of the material, as in concrete, or others are more complicated conditions are associated with the sphere of influence of the material world. Your conception of the physical world is based upon a simple material illusion. That illusion is further subdivided into three elementary or basic conditions of matter. A fourth and very important condition also exists, which you simply pay attention to more or less as you choose. It is the one bordering on the sphere of influence or plasma realm. For you, the theory of a controlled transformation or the elevation of the frequency of matter and the stable existence of this fourth aggregate condition of matter is not very common, or it exists at a very primitive level. As an aside, there are simply 5 states of matter, but the post-plasma state would really be going too far, and it would only serve to confuse you. Besides, it is not necessary for the understanding of the basic theory. It is connected with diverse phenomena which you would characterize as paranormal. Now, back to the essentials. Plasma. Now, with plasma, I don't mean just hot gas, as in the concept as generally simplified by your people, but rather, I mean a higher aggregate condition of matter. The plasma state of matter is a special form of matter which lies between its real existence and the sphere of influence. I would like to stop and make a note here, which you can leave in if you want.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to point out that where she's saying sphere of influence, we might also term that etheric body, which is electromagnetic field around objects.
Oh.
Just as a little reference for maybe a more modern way of saying things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, back to Lacerta now.
Mm-hmm.
The plasma state of matter is a special form of matter which lies between its real existence and the sphere of influence. That is, a complete loss of mass and pure accretion of energy of various forms whenever matter is pushed or shoved. Note, no explanation was given for the use of the word pushed, shoved, as used in this context. Your guess is as good as mine. The fourth state of matter is very important for certain physical conditions, which can be used, for example, to, how should I express this to you, generate anti-gravity. That's a rather strange human word and not really correct, but you ought to understand it better this way. Essentially, in the world of real physics, there are no bipolar forces, but only observer-dependent reflective behavior of a single large unified force at different levels. With anti-gravity or with the displacement of gravitational characteristics into levels, one can, for example, cause apparently solid matter to levitate. This method is employed by us, partly by us and partly by extraterrestrials, as well as a means of propulsion for their UFOs. You people are moving on a really primitive level towards a similar principle for your secret military projects. But since you have more or less stolen this technology, and as it was later falsely passed on to you intentionally by the terrestrials, you lack the real physical understanding. As a result, you have to struggle with problems of instability and radiation with your UFOs. According to my information, there have been a great number of deaths of your people because of intense radiation and field disturbances. Don't you agree this is also an example of the business regarding the question of good and evil? You people play with unknown forces and thereby accept the death of colleagues of your own kind, for they are dying for a greater cause, namely for the advancement of your technology, which as a result is being put into place once again for the purpose of war. That is, for negative pursuits. Now, one can give you the benefit of the doubt, but that only the least number of your kind have any knowledge about these alien projects, which are, as you explain it, top secret. It was told to you that the higher the ordinal or ranking number of basic matter, the simpler the heightening of the condition, but that is only partially correct. If you can't circumvent these powers, then you're better off not attempting it. But your kind has always been ignorant and has from time immemorial tried to play around with forces which you have not even understood. Why would that ever change? You remember this business of copper fusion? By means of fluctuation at the right angle with the induced radiation field, copper is fused with other elements. The illusion of matter is fused. The fields in the sphere of influence overlap each other, but the main force would be reflected by the process and would assume a quasi-bipolar character. The resulting connection and the field would therefore not be stable in the normal condition of matter and unsuited for tasks. As a result, the entire field spectrum is shifted to a higher plasma-like condition, whereby the spectrum comes together with this harsh shifting of the opposite pole side. The world is not correct of the force field, and it resembles quite closely a gravitational shift. This shifting causes a tilting of the repulsing quasi-bipolar force, which now no longer flows to the interior of the force field, but rather flows partly to the exterior of the field. The result is an interstratifying reflective force field, which is very difficult to modulate with certain technical boundaries in relation to its own characteristics. It can also carry out a multiplicity of tasks, as for example, causing massive flying objects to be levitated and maneuvered. It can also exert a camouflage function in the realm of electromagnetic radiation, as well as manipulate temporal sequences of events. Indeed, only to a very limited extent, and other things as well. Are you familiar with your quantum tunnel effect? Even the amplitude equalizations among genuine matter can be achieved with one of those kinds of fields if the frequency and the distance from the plane of the field are high enough. Unfortunately, the whole thing that I have explained to you in your words has come out to be rather primitive. I'm afraid it sounds rather strange and certainly impossible for your comprehension. but perhaps the simple explanation can be of some use to you and helping you understand. Then again, maybe not.
Cocky. Is there a scientific substantiation for paranormal powers? As, for example, with your powers of thought?
Yes. In order to explain that, one has to acknowledge the physical reality of the sphere of influence, Feldram. I'll try to do it. Wait just a second. You are going to have to separate yourself mentally from the illusion that which you see is the true nature of the universe. It is, at best, the surface of a side. Imagine for yourself that all the matter here, you, this table, this pencil, this technical device, this paper, does not really exist, but that it is rather only the result of a field oscillation and a concentration of energy. A little side note for me here, that means different frequencies of energy. The pencil, the paper, blah, blah, blah. And that's exactly what quantum physics says too.
True.
All matter that you see, every creature, every planet, and star in the universe has an information energy equivalent, its own frequency, in the sphere of influence, which is located on the main field. The general sphere of influence, which is located on the main field, this general level of things, now there is not only one level, but several. Last time I had mentioned that the highly developed species, which is capable of changing levels, which is something completely different from the simple bubble changing, for bubbles are a part of each and every level. Do you understand? Dimensions, as you call them, are a part of a solitary bubble. Bubbles or universal foam are a part of a level, and levels are layers in the sphere of influence. While the sphere of influence acting in the capacity of single physical size is essentially unending, it is composed of innumerable information energy layers and general levels. There are in the sphere of influence no null levels. All are the same, but they are separated by means of an energy conditions. I notice that I'm confusing you now. I think I ought to stop with this explanation.
No, please continue. How do concrete paranormal powers arise?
Oh, well, okay then. Let's try something simpler. Again, it is not completely correct, but let's begin in this manner. Tangible matter on this side is mirrored in the sphere of influence, Feldraum, as a field of distinct layers. These layers contain information, as an example, about the simple structure of matter or the string frequency, but also there is stored information stemming from the development of matter. Are you familiar with the human concept of morphogenetic fields? One part of the layer could be designated as such. Now, there is still another intermediary layer for which you, unfortunately, have no human concept. Since the theory is not common in human thinking, let's call it the para layer, for this layer is mainly responsible for everything which you call PSI and paranormal, and which lies outside the boundaries of your primitive science. This paralayer lies between the layer of matter and the morphogenetic layers of a field in the sphere of influence. It can actively integrate with both. Your body, for example, is mirrored as a field in the sphere of influence, Feldraum. That doesn't mean that it does not also exist here as well, as flesh, blood, bones, in the form of matter, strings, or atoms. But not only that. Existence is always a duality. Some layers of the field contain simple information about the solid matter of your body and its frequency, while other layers contain information about your spirit, your consciousness, your speaking from a human religious point of view, your soul. Awareness or consciousness in this case is a simple energy matrix divided into different layers of your field and the sphere of influence. Nothing more, nothing less. Genuine awareness can also exist here on the matter side, but only in the form of post-plasma, the fifth form of matter, with the necessary physical knowledge and the corresponding technology. The conscious awareness matrix or soul can also be separated from its field of rest. It can, despite its removal, continue to exist in a self-sufficient manner for a certain amount of time. That has the strange occult name of soul robbing. But above all, we're talking about science here, not about magic or dark forces.
The soul robbing was mentioned in one of the radical religiously motivated comments in connection with the reptilian species.
But back to your question. Creatures with more powerful mental powers can have a direct influence on the paralayer by means of their consciousness awareness fields. I'd like to stop here, Marnie, and you can leave this in if you want, but I want to say this is what I'm working with every night with Guangong and co, that we are able to affect the fields of awareness by the chanting work that we do to create stability on the planet. So this is where I come in. Cool. This point. Or we, should I say. Okay, that's aside from me. Now, this layer is not limited only to the individual, but rather as a part of a general information layer. You could call it, as a prosaic sense, the community soul that is connected with all animate and inanimate matter and all consciousness, which exists on this main level. The biological cause for these abilities lies on the side of matter, by the way, in the pituitary gland, which is always in the position to generate the frequencies of actively control the sphere of influence, the Feldrum. Even you people could theoretically do this. However, you are solidly blocked in these things. As I have said, the paralayer can interact with mind as well as with matter. For example, if I decided to use my mental power once more in order to move this pencil, then simply said, I imagine in my mind how my consciousness, awareness, expands, amplifies itself on the matter side in the form of post-plasma to the pencil. In the sphere of influence, this causes simultaneously an automatic command from the consciousness awareness layer to the paralayer to interact with the matter layer of the pencil. Since the paralayer is not confined to the body, it is not even a problem that the pencil lies over there, for I can unerringly reach it without moving my matter body. Post-plasma on this side, paralayer on the other, I have control over the pencil, and the interaction begins the matter field of the pencil to the point where it changes in the manner of which it moves, for example.
I certify that the pencil mentioned above abruptly at that very moment jumped into the air to a height of 20 centimeters and then fell back to the surface of the table. The sound is clearly heard on the recording tape. No one visibly had touched that pencil. That is fascinating. Which kind of paranormal activities can one generate with that?
All kinds. Everything that you call paranormal. As I said, this special layer lies in the sphere of influence between the morphogenic information layers and the matter layers, and can interact with respect to both sides. That is to say, it can be interacted with solid matter as with the mind or mental information, wherewith we can achieve everything that is generally designated as telekinesis and telepathy. The connection, absorption with another consciousness awareness is generally separate in the procedure from this simple influence of matter, since different consciousness awareness fields work with different oscillations. A consciousness awareness that sends a consciousness awareness that listens must first adapt itself to the other mind exactly before any access is possible. Most species also have chances to block the alien access, but you people don't have this. The following is generally valid. The stronger the paranormal abilities of a species, the simpler the adaptation and the access. Our own abilities are not so powerfully developed. Therefore, we have to learn a specifically alien mind influence in order to use our mimicry. For example, where mimicry is actually quite simple in your minds due to the implanting of the on-off switch. Some of these abilities are also partially inherited. Mother and child of my kind, as an example, are attuned exactly during the first months of life, partially known in the egg, partially also in the egg covering in the expectant mother, and communicate telepathically. In order to influence you people, we need a certain amount of time for practicing, despite your simple structure. Therefore, it is forbidden, for example, for adults of mankind before the age of enlightenment to come to the surface of the earth. That term is synonymous, along with other things, with full physical strength. In the case of not fully developed abilities, the danger of discovery by you would be too great. By the way, there are, of course, numerous secret teachings about the real possibilities which can give one these abilities, but I really don't know anything exact about that. Whenever an alien mind ought to be influenced, there are some generally valid steps which are set into motion by other extraterrestrial species. First and foremost, the alien oscillation must be felt, something generally that is done automatically by the brain. That is, for the one, the field oscillation, for the other, quasi-electrical brainwaves here in the normal space, which matter inhabits. That is not especially difficult. After that, one simply probes for the other's consciousness awareness in the mind with a post-plasma manifestation. The sphere of influence reacts and the connection is there. Now one can read out information from the first one and record the desired information to the second one in the correct location. You asked me last time whether you people have the opportunity to protect yourselves against this influence, and I told you that only an awake and concentrated mind has any kind of a chance to withstand it. In this state of mind, the oscillations change very abruptly and access becomes complicated. More precisely, it can become as a painful recoil. Whenever you close your eyes, then the field becomes flat and alien access to the mind is immediately possible and without restriction. In terms of your chances against a more highly developed species, you have none at all. They are able to adjust the oscillations faster than you can change. I could even demonstrate it on you, but you were really horrified and confused the last time, so we'll just leave it at an explanation.
In this new interview, if you notice so far, she got a lot more technical about what she
Yes.
explains.
She sure does.
And like my brain cannot comprehend what she's explaining. But like, if you're a scientist or physicist, quantum physicist, whatever, you would understand. You would like, oh, this, that, and probably you can get some ideas, get some new ideas out of it.
Yeah. She's using terms, I would put other words, and oscillations instead of frequencies, for example.
I feel like the first interview when Ule went out with it and like publish it or release it or give it to some organizations, like people were like, oh, this is a child play. Everybody can come up with this information. So I think Ule asked Lacerta to be like more specific.
Yeah,
more technical, more scientific or whatever.
And she's sure living up to that.
Yes.
Okay. This explanation presumably sounds to you like, as you say, something esoteric or from the occult or magic. The reason for that is simply that you lack the basic understanding for seeing the background reasons. All paranormal phenomena has a purely scientific origin. None of this has anything to do with supernatural powers. We grow up with this kind of knowledge. We know how one makes use of these powers and where they come from. We are acquainted with theory and practice. You are not. Therefore, you really don't understand what happens in your world. You see only one side of existence, not the other. I mean, here, both that are physical. Everything paranormal is dualistic, and it exists in the space that matter inhabits, as well as the sphere of influence. To be explained, it can only be explained by the acceptance of the latter, because the sphere of influence is the basis. I would welcome an end to the scientific questions, since you really aren't grasping them anyway. We're wasting more or less valuable time by doing this.
I really feel like Ulena, and she's right. So what she's explaining is like, there's another Fieldrum. Oh, yes. Yeah, okay. Only one last question. At our first meeting in December, you made it quite clear that you didn't want to discuss scientific and paranormal concerns. Why the openness now?
The last time I saw really no necessity for overburdening you with facts of that kind. And now you are obviously overburdened. Therefore, I have preferred only to mention these topics in a peripheral sense. Apparently, however, some of my performances today have set you to thinking about your world, something that can't be all bad. And by the way, your human scientists would tend to regard my comments as humbug. And so I see no great danger in spreading this information widely. No one will pay much attention to it. By the way, the words of people who have characterized me as a creature of evil have their basis in the belief in occult powers and magic, both of which things do not exist. There is no magic, only highly developed science, and everything that you label as magic is only part of science. If you would only comprehend that, then you will be able to step ahead in your development. My process on this issue ends here. Pose other questions, please.
Good. Let's talk about UFOs. Can you explain to me how our governments came into possession of UFO material to the point that they could start their own projects?